Okay, welcome back to you guys. Nice to see everyone back. I'm going to go into this next topic of the 5 precepts. It's referred to as a householder's guide to daily practice. What a householder is someone who's studying and learning the teachings of the Buddha on the path to enlightenment, living in a household life. That's what the vast majority of the world is doing, is living in a household life. So the Buddha has these teachings that apply for everybody. It's going to help you to actually eliminate this craving, anger, and ignorance out of the mind. This is a part of the wisdom that an individual needs to cultivate in order to be able to move their mind to enlightenment. That oftentimes we lack wisdom of this natural law of Kamma, and therefore we make unwise decisions. So these 5 precepts helps bring your attention to certain aspects of the natural law of Kamma that's going to help you to be able to make wiser and wiser decisions, leading to more and more wholesome results. Just like always, if you guys have questions, you're more than welcome to ask those. I'm going to be pausing at different times as I'm talking to give you guys a chance to ask questions. So starting with this first one, this is the original words of the Buddha on the 5 precepts. It's important. Let me just back up for a second. It's important that prior to studying something like what we're going to share with you here, is that you understand what the Buddha is teaching you is the natural law of Kamma. He's teaching you cause and effect, or action and result. Sometimes when people study teachings like what I'm going to share with you here, they think about it like rules or commandments. The Buddha never taught anything like that. He's helping you to be able to cultivate wisdom of this natural law. What the natural law of Kamma is, you guys heard in the last talk, it's cause and effect, or action and result, the results of your decisions. There's a sequence of events that an individual is making decisions about, and it's going to lead to certain results. And when you lack wisdom of these natural laws, you're going to make unwise decisions. So what you're doing when you're studying the 5 precepts is you're cultivating wisdom about the natural law of Kamma. The Buddha would never try to force you or convince you to make decisions in any particular way. Remember, he already got to peace. He already got to joy. He's not trying to force or convince you to do anything. It's your life. It's your decisions. It's your results. You get to make whatever decisions you'd like to make in life, but you will experience the consequences of those decisions. That's what the natural law of Kamma is. It's showing you wherever you're making wise decisions or unwise decisions. The natural law of Kamma is like the most unbiased teacher you will ever find, because it's going to show you at every step where you're making wise decisions and where you're making unwise decisions. So when we study this, it's important to make sure you don't approach it as rules and commandments, because just like the Buddha isn't going to be interested in, trying to convince you to do anything, I'm the same way. I'm not here trying to convince you to do anything whatsoever. If you're interested in understanding these natural laws and how to get to this peace and joy, I will share that with you, but it's up to you to make whatever decisions you like. And whenever you're learning something like this, there's surely going to be things that you might so-called disagree with, right? Well, of course, an individual who lacks wisdom about the natural laws is going to disagree with certain things that is being shared because their mind currently doesn't have the same wisdom of someone like the Buddha. And of course, we're all equal, we're all the same, but in terms of the wisdom that a Buddha has, it's going to be much higher than someone who's unenlightened. So oftentimes when people look at certain teachings, they might say, oh, I disagree with that. Well, of course, that's the mind's lack of wisdom. That's the reason why the mind's experiencing anger and sadness and frustration, all those other things. So as we go, if you have questions, that's an opportunity for you to get understanding, right? So disagreement doesn't mean disrespect. It just means that there's 2 different understandings here. And where you have that lack of understanding, and you don't have the same understanding that is being shared, that's an opportunity for you to ask questions and get information. So feel free to ask questions as we go. And it's not about whether someone agrees or disagrees with something. It's a matter of you understanding what's being shared, so that then through your reflection, you can see more and more of the truth to be able to understand these natural laws. So it's this natural law of Kamma that the Buddha is helping you to be able to see, to understand the 5 precepts. So here's his words on the first precept. He says, abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. Okay? So whenever you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, you need to be able to investigate his teaching. You need to be able to examine them. And whenever you're studying, if you don't know something that's being shared, you need to investigate that. So when you're studying a teaching like this, you can see very clearly that it's something about living beings. He's talking about something with living beings, living compassionately for living beings. Well, don't just assume that you know what a living being is. You need to know what a living being is, because if you're ever causing harm to a living being, this harm is going to come back to you. So the Buddha teaches you something called the five aggregates, or we might call it the five criteria, or the five elements that determine what is a living being and what isn't a living being. This definition is held up for 2,500 years. So I'm going to explain to you the five aggregates, and you know that you are a living being, so you can reflect on what I'm sharing with you, and you can see that you have all five of these things to independently verify that this teaching is true. So the five aggregates, or the five criteria, are the five things that this being would need to have in order to be able to be a living being. A living being is going to have physical form, right? You have physical form. That's one criteria. The next criteria is a living being is going to have feelings, right? There's certain feelings, pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. Then a living being is going to have what's called perceptions. Perceptions are your views and opinions about the world. You're going to look out at the world in a certain way. The fourth criteria is something called volitional formations. Volitional formations are your choices and decisions, that a living being is going to make their own choices and decisions. They're going to have free will. The fifth criteria is that there's a consciousness or a mind. Okay, so these are the five aggregates, or the five criteria of what make a living being a living being. They have form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and then there's a consciousness or a mind. So you know that you are a living being because you have all five of those things. But you can also see a squirrel or a rabbit or a bird or a dog or all these different things. These are living beings too. So you can reflect on this to be able to independently verify it. But the other way that you independently verify a teaching like this is you look at the other side of it too. Take something that you know is not a living being, like this chair that I'm sitting in, and see how it matches up to the five aggregates. Because if this is a true definition, then we would see that it doesn't match up to that. So ask yourself, does this chair have physical form? Yeah, it has physical form, right? Does it have feelings? Doesn't have any feelings, does it? Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? Is it like, this room is too cold. I think that we should change the temperature. It doesn't have those, right? Does it have volitional formations? Can it choose to pick itself up, walk down the street, and put itself back down? Doesn't have those, right? And it doesn't have a consciousness or a mind, right? So we can see that it doesn't match up to the five aggregates. So you can see how this definition holds true. So this is a teaching that you would peer into, and you would investigate the five aggregates, because you need to know it very closely, because anytime you cause harm to a living being, this harm is going to come back to you. So you'd like to be able to identify a living being, and it's the five aggregates that are going to help you do that. But as you're making your way towards the five aggregates, I give you kind of this little shorthand way of thinking about it. This isn't part of the natural laws, but it'll help you in about 99% of all situations, is that a living being is going to come from an egg, it's going to have a sperm, and there's going to be a consciousness. Again, there are some living beings that don't come from an egg and a sperm, but they do all have a consciousness because of the five aggregates. So in 99% of the situations, this is going to hold up and be true. But that's not enough. In order to get to enlightenment, you need to have 100% of wisdom. So that's why you study the five aggregates, and you need to know those inside and out and understand how to apply them in day-to-day life. But in the meantime, you can use this, that there's an egg and a sperm and a consciousness. That's going to indicate that that this is a living being. And there's other living beings that don't meet this, but you understand the point here, that you can use this kind of as a shorthand way. So now you can start looking at things like bacteria and viruses. And you can see that we oftentimes use language that actually doesn't represent true reality. We might say, I'm going to take this antibiotic and I'm going to kill this virus, or I'm going to kill this bacteria that's in the body. Well, you're not actually killing it because it's not a living being, right? You can see through the five aggregates that it doesn't have all five aggregates, right? It also didn't come from an egg, a sperm, and it doesn't have a consciousness. But you can also see it from the natural law of Kamma, because whenever you cause harm to a living being, harm is going to come back to you. And when you eliminate a bacteria from the body, or you eliminate a virus from the body, you're actually experiencing wholesome results. you're not experiencing unwholesome results. If this was a living being and you were truly killing it, that means you would experience unwholesome results. Because if you went out into the world and you killed another human being or you killed an animal, you're going to experience unwholesome results. But we use this language of killing this bacteria. That's not really what you're doing. You're actually eliminating the bacteria from the body, right? That's what you're truly doing, is you're eliminating the virus from the body. And we can also look at things like plants. Sometimes people talk about plants as being alive. We might say, oh, don't kill that plant. Or I'm going to go kill that plant. Someone might say that. You're not actually killing it because it's not a living being. What we're really doing is harvesting this plant, right? We're maybe cutting down this tree. We're harvesting the material in order for us to now do something with it, like make a house or some other object, right? For us to be able to sustain our life. So you need to be able to see that the language that we use oftentimes when we have this lack of wisdom is not really truly representing true reality, that we sometimes say things that we're going to kill this thing, but it's not actually a living being. So this can help you to more see what it is that the Buddha is sharing here. Is he's talking about living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Right? That's what he's teaching you to do. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. That when you see a being has misfortune, that you have concern. Whether you do something about that or not is a whole separate question. But compassion is a mental state that you have concern for the misfortune of others. So what the Buddha is teaching you to do is have concern for all living beings. And whenever you're having concern for all living beings, it starts with this being, who you are. If you don't have concern for this being, if you don't have compassion for this being, how could you ever have compassion for other beings, right? So you're always cultivating this compassion, making sure that this is in your mind along with other healthy mental states as well. So then once you understand that the Buddha is teaching you to have this concern for the misfortune of others, you start looking at different situations where you could potentially cause harm. And I've got a couple of them listed here, like euthanasia of a human or animal, termination of a pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, government-sponsored killings, murders. These are all intentional killings. But whether or not you're going to experience unwholesome results or not depends on how you make these decisions. I can actually give you examples where these decisions could actually be potentially helpful or harmful. And you need to be able to see that, because oftentimes we think about these things as black and white, and that's not what the Buddha is teaching you. There's this large gray area that you need to be able to understand. He's teaching you to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So I'm going to take some of these and I'm going to show you how you apply this teaching in day-to-day life. So let's just take this one of termination of a pregnancy. Now, some people, when they talk about this, they think it's a political issue. I don't think of it that way. It's a medical thing. It's a human issue. We have this technology to be able to terminate pregnancies, and in some situations it could be used beneficially, and in other situations it could be used potentially harmfully. But whether somebody chooses to use it or not, that's a decision for them to make. It's not up to me to tell other people what they should or shouldn't do with the medical technology like termination of a pregnancy. It's up for each individual to decide. In fact, if somebody came to me and they said, hey, David, should I terminate this pregnancy or not? I wouldn't say yes or no, because it's their decision, right? I would say, well, if you terminate the pregnancy, here's what you'll experience. And if you don't terminate it, here's what you'll experience. And now the choice is up to you, right? It's not up to me to tell people what they should or shouldn't do. But I'm going to give you examples here where it could actually be helpful and a situation where it could potentially be unhelpful. Let's just say I was a woman. Obviously, I'm not. I don't have a womb in this body, right? But if I did, and let's just say the doctor looked at this being inside the body that was growing in the womb, and this doctor told me that there's no way for this being, this fetus, to ever live outside the body and live a viable life. And as long as you leave this inside your body, you can potentially die at any time. And this doctor might say, we advise you to terminate the pregnancy, right? And now it's up to me to decide what I'm going to do in this situation. Well, if I choose to terminate the pregnancy, this is living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because I've been informed that this being inside the body isn't going to live a viable life outside the womb. And as long as I leave it inside there, it's actually threatening the life of this being. So if I just left it in there, then now it's threatening my life, and now I could potentially die. This is not living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So someone might choose to terminate the pregnancy. And this could be a wise decision, and it could produce wholesome results for that person. But also on the flip side of this, let's just say I'm regularly having unprotected sex, and maybe I'm regularly getting pregnant, and now 4, 5, 6, 8 different times I'm getting pregnant, and I'm terminating pregnancies every single time using this medical technology. Well, each time you do that, it's actually causing harm to your body. So after the second, third, fourth, fifth time that this is occurring, it's starting to cause harm to my body now. Now I'm starting to experience unwholesome results because of those decisions, where this decision to terminate the pregnancy because the being inside the fetus is not going to live a viable life outside the womb. This is kind of like a once in a lifetime kind of thing, maybe twice in a lifetime kind of thing, where over here, if I'm regularly terminating pregnancies 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 different times, I'm going to start noticing health issues with my own body from having done that. Right? This is the difference. So it's not just about whether someone chooses to terminate a pregnancy or not. It's up to each individual to decide that for themselves. But you can see the natural law of Kamma here is very different. Right? So you need to be able to discern these kinds of things for yourself. Let's take another example. Like, let's just say, it's not even up here. Let's just say that my house was infected with termites. This is actually a real situation. Me and my wife we had termites at the house one time. My wife came to me and she said, "David, we have termites." I was like, "Really? I've never even seen a termite. Like, where are the termites?" And she started taking me around the house and she's showing me. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, we need to take care of this." So living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, we got online and we checked to see, is there a way to get rid of termites without killing them, right? Because that was our first instinct, that we would like to be able to do it that way if possible. And the more we researched, we found out, no, there's no way to do that. So my wife ended up calling somebody, and they came over and they drilled holes around the house and they put this food there, and then they took it back to their nest. And over the course of a couple of years, these termites were no longer in our home anymore. Well, if we left these termites there to continue to eat our home, that's not living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because we are the living beings that are using this home, and now we're not living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. We would be out of a home. We can't purchase another home. It's not possible. So it's important to see here that the Buddha's teaching, he's not saying preserve all life at all costs. That's not what he's saying. Sometimes that's what people see when they read a teaching like this. He's saying live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, meaning you have concern for the misfortune of others. So we have concern for these insects, for these animals, right? That they don't have the same level of consciousness as a human being, that they don't realize they're even causing harm, right? Because if we're a human being, if we ate wood and that's how we sustained our life, we'd go out into the forest and we'd go to a place where we know we're not going to impact other beings, and we would eat those trees, right? But an animal like a termite, they don't have that level of consciousness. That's the unfortunate thing of being in the animal realm. So now these animals are causing harm, and now harm came to them. That's the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect. So the Buddha isn't teaching you to preserve all life at all costs. He's teaching you to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Another example that's actually up here is, let's just say, like war, right? A government could tell you, hey, go over there and kill those people. If you go over there and kill those people, that's completely fine with us. But if you come over here and you kill these people in our land, we're going to arrest you for murder and we're going to take you to jail, right? This is the human laws. The human laws are imperfect. They're not going to function perfectly. So a government could say that. But if you understand the natural law of Kamma, you might decide that this could potentially be unwise for you. Because if you go off into war, you can't escape and hide from the natural law of Kamma. If you're going off to kill people, you're likely to be killed yourself, right? And that you could potentially get injured, where maybe you have an amputation or a brain injury. People who come back from war oftentimes are addicted to drugs and alcohol sometimes. Sometimes they have difficulties reintegrating into society, getting jobs and employment and housing. This is part of the natural law of Kamma, the cause and effect. By choosing to go off to war, maybe the government gave you permission to do that. They didn't arrest you for it, but you're still experiencing the results of your decisions. That's the natural law of Kamma. So again, whether someone chooses to do that or not, that's a choice for them to make. I'm not here to tell people what they should or shouldn't do. I'm just here to help you see the natural law of Kamma, and that you can't run and hide from this natural law. And the government could tell you to go kill those people, and they're not going to arrest you, but you're still going to experience the natural law of Kamma. So there's various situations that students ask me about all throughout the time that I've ever been teaching these teachings. And you guys might have questions too when we get to this, but here's a few that students have asked me about. There's something called a DNR. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or if your country even has this. It's called a do not resuscitate order. This is a legal document that you can put into place that it informs your family that if this being dies, don't bring me back to life. Don't use medical technology to bring me back. And students have asked me, like, is this practicing this precept? And I say, yeah, it is, because you haven't killed anybody. You haven't intentionally killed anybody. You're just saying, I'm comfortable with death. And if this being dies, no need to bring me back to life. So you would still be practicing this. And then sometimes people ask me about defense and protection. What if someone breaks into your house at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning and you're in the bed sleeping, right? What do? Right? Well, there's not this black and white decision tree, right? It's not like always do it this way and never do it this way. This would be black and white. You need to move to a higher consciousness, and you need to think through your decisions here. One thing I can tell you is that if someone's breaking into your house, coming in through the window at 2 a.m. in the morning, they're not there bringing you chocolate and flowers, right? They're surely there to do harm, right? You know that for sure. So if I was you, what I would choose to do is, if you can, get out of the house. They want to break up the house, they want to steal something, they want to do something, fine, so be it. You go get safe, go to a neighbor's house, go somewhere else, call the police. They're the ones who have the tools and the training to be able to take care of that kind of situation. But it's not black and white. You can't always get outside of your house, right? These teachings aren't a decision tree, because if it was a decision tree and you always do it this way, that would be permanence. And we live in an impermanent world. Sometime you might look outside your window when you hear someone coming in the window downstairs. You look outside your bedroom window and you see that there's a gang of people outside your house. And the last thing you're thinking about is leaving. Or maybe the community is on fire. Maybe there's a fire and you can't get outside your house. So you need to move to this higher consciousness and think through your decisions calmly and decide what you're going to do. Well, if you're backed up in the corner and somebody's there with a knife or a stick and is hitting you, it wouldn't be living compassionately to just sit there and let them keep stabbing you or hitting you with this stick. So if you need to cause harm to that person in order to stop that harm coming to you, then go for it, right? Because that is the natural law of Kamma. This person has chosen to cause harm, and now you're stopping that harm. They're now receiving the harm because they're choosing to cause harm. You're not going out into the world intentionally looking to cause harm. You're just standing there minding your own business, sleeping in your house, and now this person's coming to you to cause harm. So remember, this isn't saying preserve all life at all costs. It's saying to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So one of the ways to live compassionately in this situation is cause the least amount of harm as possible. If this person has a stick, get a bigger stick, right? And now try to stop this from occurring, right? And just cause the least amount of harm as possible to stop this individual from coming at you. That would be the best thing to do, right? So each one of these situations are going to be different. And that's why you've got to decide in the moment. And that's why the Buddha is teaching you to keep your mind calm and peaceful so that now you can make wise decisions. Whereas if your mind's all shaken up with fear and anger and frustration, it's going to be really hard to make decisions in that situation. Another thing that students ask me about, and you might choose to look at, is how you consume certain products. If you're currently eating meat or animal products, that's where you are. I'm not here to convince you to do anything, but what you'll notice is that if you move to a plant-based food supply, that you'll experience better health. That as long as you're eating meat, there's a certain amount of illness and sickness that you're going to experience, and it's also affecting your mind because the animal flesh that you're eating, it has drugs and hormones and toxins in it, and it's going to affect the health of the body, and it's going to affect the health of your mind. So you might decide at some point to look at moving to a plant-based plant-based food supply. But when or if you ever choose to do this, it's a choice for you to make. Again, I'm just here helping you to be able to see this natural law. They've taken fish out of wild places like in the U.S. where there's supposed to be a clean running stream, and they've tested the animal flesh, and they found over 90 different substances that weren't supposed to be there, drugs and hormones and toxins and stuff like that, because we've actually flushed this stuff down into the water through human interaction. They found things like cocaine and antidepressants in the flesh of the animal. So when you're eating that animal, you're actually eating that stuff too, and it's affecting your mind, it's affecting the health of the body. And then there's farming, that people will oftentimes put antibiotics and growth hormones and things like this into the animals, and you're eating that kind of stuff as well. At one time, human beings, we used to be plant-based eaters. That's what scientists and researchers tell us, that when we first came into the world, we all ate plants. And then we ran out of supply in the forest, so we started eating meat out of necessity. And we saw animals that were killing, and what we would do is we would organize and we would come together and we would kind of scare away the animals, and we would take over their hunt, and we would start eating their meat. So we were essentially scavengers, right? And then that wasn't enough meat for us, so we started doing organized hunting, where we came together and we organized and we did hunting, and then we started killing animals that way. And then that wasn't enough meat for us, so we started doing manufactured farming. Well, you don't need to believe scientists and researchers that we used to be plant-based eaters, because remember, you're not interested in believing anybody at all. You need independent verification that these things are true. And the thing that you can point to see this for yourself is look at your teeth. Is that your teeth are very similar to a cow or to a horse. These are animals that actually eat plants. Our teeth are so similar to those that we don't have the teeth of a meat eater, like a lion or a tiger or something like this. We don't have that type of teeth that requires the ripping and tearing of meat, because we were always plant-based eaters from the very beginning. We only moved to meat out of necessity. So that's why you're starting to see more and more people starting to move to plant-based food supply. And if you choose to do that, you'll see more health in the body and in the mind. But whether you choose to do that or if you choose to do that, it's a choice for you to make, but you'll see the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, or action and result, that it will produce more health in the body and in the mind because of it. So do you guys have any questions on this first precept? Yes, ma'am. Yes, feel free to get the mics. We changed the batteries, so they should work better, or Leo did. Thank you, Leo.
Yes, thank you. So in regards to the, I don't know if I can read properly there, but well, you were talking about, I mean, this whole concept.
Mm-hmm.
This notion that it's not random that you would, for instance, get attacked, or that you would experience accidents or assaults and so on and so forth. Because if we were to apply the law of Kamma, then somehow you've done some wrong yourself, maybe even in past lives. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I'm just trying to experiment with this, why that has occurred in your life. And the fact that, for instance, there are certain people that have never lived the exact same amount of, let's say, a few decades, and one of them has never experienced any accidents, any assaults, or any negative experiences like that, and the other has, and they might have lived in the same type of environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be very curious in knowing what your thoughts are on that.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay?
If I can answer one question at a time, but then after I'm done, feel free to ask the next one. So yeah, you're right. It's not random that we're experiencing what we experience. It's results of our decisions. And when we make certain decisions, we will then experience a certain result. No matter how enlightened you are, no matter how wise you are, there's 5 things that you can't obtain in this life. You can't obtain permanent, let me say it this way. They're called the unobtainables, okay? That you're going to experience sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction. These are the 5 things that you will absolutely experience even when you're enlightened. You will still experience sickness, aging, death, loss of your material things, and also destruction too, because all of this is based in impermanence, that things are continuing to change. But the difference is in the unenlightened state, you will experience frustration or anger or some other discontent feeling. By the time you get to enlightenment, even when you're experiencing sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction, you won't experience any discontentedness because you don't have a craving for permanence. You understand that these 5 things are based in impermanence. It's going to happen. So an individual can experience these things in the unenlightened state or even in the enlightened state: sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction. When you know that your mind is unenlightened and you're experiencing any of these types of things like an accident, right? You need to be able to look at the decisions that led to that particular thing and look at it wisely to be able to see what decisions that I make that led to this particular result or being attacked or something like this. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's just say somebody went out at midnight, they went to a bar and they were drinking and, maybe even using drugs, or maybe they weren't. Maybe other people were drinking and using drugs. And now the bar closes at 2 a.m. and everybody spills out into the street. Now they're hanging out in the parking lot, and let's just say somebody comes over and starts assaulting them and beating them up. Well, this wasn't a random thing. This was based in decisions that person made. They went outside at midnight. They went to a bar, a place where there was drugs and alcohol being used. They came outside, and now they're around all these people who are intoxicated and using drugs and alcohol, and now that person ended up getting beat up, right? So that wasn't a random event. They experienced this sickness, right? Because they're getting beat up. They're experiencing this loss and destruction of the physical body. They're experiencing that, but it was certain decisions that they made that led to that particular situation. And now when you look at it, you can say, this is really unwise for me to go to places where people are using drugs and alcohol. I should probably do other things besides that because I'm more susceptible to getting attacked or assaulted in that situation. But then you can have another situation. I'll just give you this example. Like, let's just say somebody got into an accident in a car, right? You could have one person who gets into an accident in a car and maybe they're on their phone. They're, not attending to all the details of what's happening in their car. And now they get into an accident because they're not focused. They're not concentrated. And that person gets into an accident. And now we can say there was these certain decisions that led to this result of this individual experiencing the accident. Well, there can be another person who gets into an accident too, and they're very focused and they're very concentrated. But just because of the decisions that they're making to drive a car, there's now somebody else who wasn't paying attention, and now they hit this other person, right? So in both situations, the situation is the same. They both got into a car accident. But when this person looks at their decisions, they can see like, whoa, I was concentrated, I was focused, I was paying attention to the road. It was somebody else who decided or was not paying attention to their driving that now they bumped into my car. But this was part of loss and destruction. Because of impermanence, you're still going to experience that. You can't avoid loss and destruction. So it is your Kamma. Sometimes when people hear me share that by the time you get to enlightenment, you're experiencing 100% wholesome Kamma. You're not experiencing any unwholesome Kamma. Sometimes when people hear me say that, they think, oh, that means nothing is ever happening to me. That means like people are rolling out the red carpet for me and I can just walk through life and nothing, so quote unquote, is bad is happening, right? So it's important when you're looking at the natural law of Kamma that you don't think about it as right and wrong, right? Because someone might say, well, these people both must have did something wrong. That's why they're experiencing that. That's not true. That this person over here did something unwise, which is drove their car without being focused and concentrated. That's what led to their accident. That was unwise. I don't think of it as wrong because that's kind of like being judgmental towards that person, right? Instead, I just think about it, hey, that's unwise. And for my life, I'm not going to choose to do that. But somebody over here could be in this car paying full attention to everything that's happening and still get into an accident. And this was just a matter of impermanence, that they live in an impermanent world. There was certain choices and decisions that they made to get into a car, drive in a car. And now this other person's choices led to them experiencing this loss and destruction with their car and with their physical body. So does this help you to be able to see that there?
Yes, thank you. I mean, then if you were to apply this to a child who's being assaulted in different ways, then you would just say, this child is living in an world and this can happen sometimes.
No, this is different. So what you were saying about the past lives, that we can experience harms based on our past life, this is true. You'll experience the results of your decisions either in this life, the next life, or some future life. And this is also something that you don't believe, right? Because I mentioned to you, none of the teachings of the Buddha are based in belief. You can actually independently verify the cycle of rebirth. That you might not have the wisdom of how to do that right now, but there's ability for you to gain that wisdom. In volume 11, chapter 105, I have 17 different criteria that help you to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. So someone could investigate that if they like. But it's in volume 11, chapter 105 for a reason, because there's other teachings that you need to be able to learn and independently verify before you get to that. But we do experience the results of our decisions either in this life, the next life, or some future life. So this child who's being born into the world, they are being reborn. All of us were reborn because we didn't get to enlightenment in our last life. That was a choice that we made. We might not even known the teachings existed in those previous lives, or we might have even came out of the animal world as well. So nonetheless, we're being born into this life. And now that we're in this life, whatever life we're born into, it's based on the decisions from our previous life. So what realm we're born into and the condition that we're born into, whether we're in a rich family, a poor family, whether we're beautiful or ugly or handsome or healthy or not healthy, all those types of things are all decisions based on our previous life. Because this new mind coming into this life hasn't made any decisions yet. It's just coming into this life. And now in this new life, let's just say at 3 years old or 5 years old, this individual's having sexual abuse. It's important to not see the natural law of Kamma as punishments or rewards, right? It's also important not to see it as this person deserves this, right? That's not what the natural law of Kamma is teaching you. It's just showing you a sequence of events that is occurring. And in this situation, this individual was born into a family where now they're being physically abused or sexually abused. And it's a result of decisions. But exactly what decision this being made, or multiple decisions that this being made in a previous life, you can't really discern that. It's not possible. But nonetheless, it has been reborn. And now that it's experiencing this situation, you know, obviously that's unfortunate, and it would be great for that being to get out of that situation, and potentially it will. Let's just say as it gets to adulthood, now it's away from that abusive situation. But now the individual is having certain thoughts in their mind and they're clinging to that experience. And now in the present moment, they might have sadness or despair or uncomfortableness in their mind based on abuse that's happened in the past. Some people call this trauma. Well, some people think that this is permanent and that, you know, you're always going to live with this for the rest of your life. But it's actually not true. You can actually eliminate the feelings that you're experiencing. That if an individual is experiencing feelings today based on things that happened in the past, this is just the mind clinging to that experience. And now it's forming feelings today based on an experience in the past. So you can train your mind to no longer form feelings today based on things that happened in the past. You will always remember that these things happen, but you won't form feelings about them. So if a child is born into a situation where it is being abused, it's experiencing that because of decisions that it made. But now as it gets to adulthood, it can change what it experiences by choosing to train its mind. And now this 20-something-year-old, 30-something, 40-something, whatever age, can choose to train its mind. And now it won't experience the difficulties and struggles from those events that happened in its childhood. But it is a sequence of events that is occurring. But it's not what you were describing of just, oh, well, it's just impermanence. There are sequence of events that are occurring. And now we just make wiser and wiser decisions to train our mind so that we can get to enlightenment in this life. And then you won't experience rebirth for this type of thing to potentially occur in the future. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I saw that coming up. Looks like, here we go. Did you have a second question, ma'am? Mm-hmm.
Unrelated to this question. Meat eating and I mean, I've myself known a few different people from all sorts of walks of life where they have been vegetarians and vegans for a period of time, sometimes, even for 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
And they've increasingly experienced anemia, fatigue, and they've kind of had to resort to start to eat meat, even if though they have a repulsion almost towards the taste consistency of the meat. So what I completely understand how our anatomy is, in a way that doesn't fit the meat eating being, but it's interesting to also to hear what you would say about those situations. Maybe it's the mind, but
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's always a middle way, right? And it's never always do it this way and never do it this way, because we're kind of like the first generation, so to speak, the first large group of people that are starting to move towards plant-based eating in large numbers, right? And because of that, a lot of us, the body is really dependent on animal products. And what people might see is that when they move to plant-based products, even with taking supplements and things like this, that the body just doesn't function well, because we're like the first generation coming off of meat. And throughout humanity, we've been with meat for so long. So there's a middle way here, right? So if somebody moved a plant-based food supply, maybe they were doing that for 3 years, 5 years, 10, 20 years, what have you. If they're noticing that there's health issues and they choose to now maybe have some eggs or some cheese or things like this can actually help. Even if they've tried supplements and things like this, they might not fully work to be able to have them have the health that they need. So when you're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, you always need to start with this being first. So if somebody's chosen to move to plant-based foods, that's having compassion for the welfare of all living beings. And now when they're doing that for 3, 4, 5, however many years, even with taking supplements, they might realize, oh my goodness, like I can't maintain the health of this being. So now let me come a little bit more here to the middle, where now I can maybe eat some cheese or some eggs or things like this that isn't directly causing death to another being, but understanding that we are the first large group of population of people that are moving to plant-based food, we might need to do things like that. Where let's just say 500, 1,000, 3,000 years from now, if more and more people have moved to plant-based food, we'll get to the point where as all of humanity, we won't need those animal products any longer because our bodies will have adapted. There's students that I have that they were vegan when they were inside the womb, like their mother was vegan. And these people are like in their 40s or 50s now, the students that are studying with me, and they've never had a piece of meat their entire life. They don't take any supplements whatsoever, and they're completely fine 100%, right? That's because their body never got never had meat at all. So for those of us that have had meat, and I'm one of those people that have had meat, we can try to move to a plant-based food supply, do that for a period of time, see how that works, maybe even take supplements as part of that. But if need be, we might need to come back over here to have a little bit of animal products in order to be able to maintain the health of this being. And that would still be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, realizing that, hey, this is the circumstances that this being is in, that we need to make decisions to maintain the health of this being. And that might mean that we need to take a little bit of animal products for now, but then understanding in the future, beings will be able to fully be on plant-based if that's what they choose. It's up to each person to do that for themselves. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I don't see any other questions anywhere. All right. So let's go to this next one. This next one, here's the words of the Buddha. Abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given, without stealing. So here, the Buddha is obviously talking about stealing and how unwise that would be. By the way, all these things that I'm teaching you, I mentioned it at the beginning, it's all based in craving, anger, and ignorance, right? If we have a craving that we want something, well, someone might steal it. Right? If they're not willing to work for it themselves, that's coming from craving. It's also coming from anger and ill will. They have ill will towards this other person, because if I was to steal someone's car, I've just caused them harm. I can't cause them to be discontent, but I can cause them harm. If I stole this person's car, they can't go to work to sustain their life. They can't take their children to school if they have children. They can't go to the store and buy supplies that they need in order to sustain their life. I've just caused this person harm. And when you cause someone harm, this harm is going to come back to you. So that's why the Buddha teaches that it's unwise to cause or to steal, because you're causing harm. And where that's coming from is an individual's craving, their anger, and their ignorance, or their unknowing of true reality. The same thing back here with killing. There has to be a certain amount of craving in the mind to kill another being, a certain amount of anger and hatred and ill will, and a certain amount of ignorance, right? A knowing of true reality. So that's why the Buddha is teaching not to steal here, because that's going to come back to you. And then we can also understand that it's unwise to assume that something can be used or taken, because this can produce unwholesome results for us. Let's just say I was a student at school in college and I was turning in a term paper and my professor is out of the room and I didn't staple this paper and I see a stapler on their desk. Maybe I'm like, okay, let me just grab the stapler and I start stapling it. Well, now the professor walks in and was like, hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler. Now they're getting angry and frustrated, right? Because they're attached to their stapler, right? And they don't realize they're causing their own anger. They think I'm the one who's causing their anger, but it would be unwise for me to use this stapler without asking, right? Because now this anger that this professor's having, they're going to now take it out on me, right? Now they fail me on my paper, perhaps, or maybe they fail me in the whole class. They're so angry, right? So now all this work that I did in this class, now I have failed the class, right? So it would be wiser to wait for the teacher to come in, the professor to come in and say, hey, do you mind if I use your stapler? They're either going to say yes or no. If they say yes, okay, I use it. If they say no, okay, no worries. I'll go find one somewhere else, right? Then you'll know for sure, right? And you're not going to run into unwholesome kamma in the situation. But remember, the Buddha's teachings here, it's not black and white. You need to move to this higher consciousness and be able to see what would be wise or unwise in any given situation. If I was out in my village and there was a neighbor that was doing some yard work and they cut themselves and they were bleeding profusely out of their arm and they're going to die if they don't get help. Well, if I see my other neighbor has a fabric on their porch, I'm not going to go over and ring their doorbell and be like, wait there for them to come downstairs and be like, by the way, do you mind if I use your fabric? No, I'm just going to grab the fabric, wrap up the tourniquet, get them on an ambulance and send them on their way, right? And then after they're on their way, then I'm going to go to my neighbor, ding dong. Hello, neighbor. I'm so sorry to bother you. I apologize. I used this fabric on your porch. Our neighbor was bleeding and we were able to put a tourniquet on and it looks like they're going to be okay. I really am sorry. I'd like to replace that fabric for you. Is there a place that I can go to buy it for you, or can I give you the money for it? Right? Because if you understand this precept, you're not just going to take it and then not look back. You're going to go take care of the situation, right? So you need to move to this higher consciousness and understand in general, you shouldn't assume that things can be taken and used, but there's going to be rare situations where you might need to just grab that fabric and just make it happen. Then there's accepting what is given. Accepting what is given is that whenever people are practicing generosity with you, it's typically wise to accept what is given and accept that thing. Because when someone's practicing generosity, it's helping enhance the quality of their mind, and it's training their mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. Because I taught you guys that earlier, that generosity helps you to let go. So if grandma's giving you a sweater at Christmas and you look at the sweater and you know you're never going to wear that sweater ever, it's wise to just accept it, because now grandma is practicing generosity. It's helping the quality of her mind. But now what you can do is you can practice generosity too. You can give it to somebody else. And now it goes through 3, 4, 5, 10 different hands. And eventually someone's like, that's the most beautiful sweater I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm going to wear that every single day. Well, if grandma gets angry that you gave away the sweater, that's because she wasn't practicing pure generosity. She had an expectation that you were going to wear the sweater. Because your other option here is to put the sweater in the closet and just let it sit there for 20 or 30 years and then nobody gets to use it and the resources go to waste. So you could actually practice generosity, and now all those different hands that it went through, they all practice generosity too. Everybody practiced generosity along the way, and now everybody's enhancing the quality of their mind. So this is in general the way you would like to practice. But again, there's a higher consciousness here. There's a higher level of understanding that if somebody offered you cocaine or crystal methamphetamine or heroin, are you going to accept what is given? No, you're not going to accept that, right? That would be unwise. So it's never black and white. It's never always do it this way and never do it that way. You need to use your higher consciousness and think through this. Then there's awaiting what is given. Awaiting what is given is that instead of putting expectations on people of what you want them to get you, instead it's better for you to await something, right? So like, for example, if you have a life partner who's going on a business trip and you are like, hey, honey, get me this and get me that and get me this and get me that. You're loading this person up with a bunch of expectations. And now they're going around that town trying to find all the things you want. And if they come back and they have it, you're happy. And if they don't have what you want, you'll be angry or frustrated. So the Buddha teaches you just await what is given, right? If somebody would like to buy you something, wonderful, and you accept that gift. But if not, don't load them up with a bunch of expectations. But again, there's some differences here. I've had students come to me and they said, hey, David, I'm going back to the USA. Is there anything that you would like? Is there anything that I can bring you? Right? In this situation, they're practicing generosity. And in that situation, I was like, oh yeah, there's this one thing that I haven't been able to find here in Thailand. And they were able to get that for me. Now I've been able to find that thing, but nonetheless, this person was practicing generosity, right? So there's situations where someone might be offering you. And in that situation, you're still awaiting what is given. You're not putting expectations on people to get you things, because that's going to sabotage your ability to be peaceful and joyful when you put expectations on other people. So do you guys have questions on this precept here? No questions? Okay. Let me just check online here for a moment. Okay. I don't see questions here either. Okay. So here's the third one. I'll read this one to you and then we'll teach it to you, how to apply it in day-to-day life. It says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men who are protected by their mother, father and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner, whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. So this is normally translated as no sexual misconduct, right? Well, what's sexual misconduct, right? Who knows what that is? Well, the Buddha knows. He's explaining to you the natural law related to your sexual activity, because you can actually cause harm through your sexual activity, and this harm is going to come back to you, right? He's teaching you this cause and effect, this natural law of Kamma. But you can also have sex in a way that isn't causing harm to others, and that's what the Buddha is teaching you here. So right here, where he's talking about abandoning sexual relations with women or men who are protected by their family, essentially what he's talking about here. He's talking about not having sex with minors. If we were to have sex with minors, we're taking that individual away from their family who's helping them to grow and learn and develop. And this is causing harm to that individual and to the family as well. I mean, if you've had sex before, you know how impactful that was. But if you can imagine doing that at 8 or 10 or 12 years old, that would be very impactful for somebody at that age. And if we were to choose to do that, that would be unwise. So the Buddha is teaching us to not do that. It would be unwise for us to do that. Now, remember, these teachings are independently verifiable. You need to be able to see this truth for yourself. In most places in the world, there's human laws that match up to this, right? But there's actually some places in the world, it's not illegal to have sex with a child. You could actually have sex with an 8-year-old child, a 10-year-old child, and the government would not arrest you for that. But you can see the natural law of Kamma is still at play here. If you look at those societies, they're actually having a lot of difficulties with their political environment, with their economics, and the way that the whole society is being conducted as a whole. They're having a lot of difficulties in those places. So if you are familiar with those types of places, you can look at them and you can see that because people are having sex at such an early age, they don't have the growth and the development in their society that's helping them to build a sustainable environment for the whole population of people. So that's why the Buddha teaches that. Where he says here, whose violation entails a penalty, he's talking about sex without consent. If we were to forcibly have sex with someone, raping them essentially, this would cause harm. We could get beat up, we could get murdered, we could get sexually transmitted diseases, we can get arrested. All these kinds of things are all possible. That's the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect. Then up here where he says abandon unchastity, you guys familiar with what chastity is? I'll explain to you guys what chastity is. In medieval times, there were fathers who would have metal underwear made for their daughters, and then they would have a lock and key, and their daughters would wear these metal underwear, and it was only the father that had the lock or had the key to the lock. So when these metal underwear were on the daughter, nobody was having sex with anybody, right? It was impossible for her to have sex. So that would be chastity, right? So unchastity is completely the opposite of that. That would be having sex with lots of different people. So what the Buddha is saying is it would be unwise to have sex with lots and lots and lots of different people. So if we were to have sex with multiple partners, having sex with lots of different people, we would experience unwholesome results. This is where we can get sexually transmitted diseases. That's the unwholesome kamma of our decision. Whether you choose to do it or not, again, it's your choice, right? We can get beat up. We can get murdered. People get jealous in these situations. That's why you're getting beat up and murdered, right? You can also have property damage where people find out that you're having sex with multiple people and they'll start destroying your property. You can lose your reputation in the community. These are all the results of our decisions. We can lose our wealth and our money. This is the unwholesome kamma as part of that. Again, whether you choose to do it or not, choice for you, but you can see why the Buddha is teaching this kind of thing. There's some cultures that if you go out and you meet a partner, you might come home to your mom and dad and say, "Hey, can we move in here? We're gonna get married, or we are married. Can we live with you guys for a while? And then we're gonna save up money, and then we're gonna go get our own house." And in that situation, your parents might say, "Yeah, come on in. Like, you guys can stay here," right? That's not what the Buddha is talking about here, where he's talking about people who are protected by their mother, father, and so forth and so on. In that situation, the family has accepted the relationship. And in this situation, you would be experiencing wholesome kamma. You're not going to experience unwholesome kamma in that situation. Here, where the Buddha talks about who are protected by teachings, what he's talking about is people who have decided to be celibate. In order to get to enlightenment, you're actually going to need to ultimately eliminate sexual contact. That might not be where you're at today. I see many of you guys are pretty young. Whether you choose to eliminate sexual contact or not is a choice for you to make. You can get to the second stage of enlightenment and still be having sexual contact. But you can see through your sexual contact that when you're having sex, you'll feel happy and excited about that. But when you're not having sex, there's a disgruntledness, there's an agitation or frustration. If you ever gone a period of time without having sex, you can see that the mind has a longing, yearning for it. And as long as you were getting it, you felt happy. But when you weren't having sex, there was this agitation or frustration in the mind. So some people, when they're young, maybe even they're interested in having a family or having relationships or what have you, they might work their way up to the second stage of enlightenment and still be choosing to have sex at that point. But at some point, they might decide 10, 20, 30, 50 years, who knows, to move into this third or fourth stage of enlightenment, where when you're in the fourth stage of enlightenment, that's when your mind's actually enlightened. And by that time, you would have eliminated sexual contact. And this is going to help you to be able to then experience the complete peace and complete joy, where the mind's always peaceful and always joyful. As long as you have a craving for sex, you'll be happy when you're getting it, and you'll be disgruntled or frustrated when you're not getting it. So that's why the mind ultimately needs to eliminate the desire, the longing, the yearning for sexual contact. There's nothing wrong with sex. It's just that the mind has a craving for it. It's trying to get these pleasant feelings, and it can't get to complete peace and complete joy as long as it has that in the mind. So there's some people that have chosen to get rid of sexual contact. They've decided to be celibate. And that's where the Buddha is saying, who are protected by their teachings. The very best thing that could ever happen for an individual is to get to enlightenment. Getting to enlightenment, your mind's permanently peaceful, permanently joyful. And it's not only beneficial for that person, but all the people around that person too. Because now those people can actually learn the wisdom that it takes to be able to get to that enlightened mental state. So if we were to try to lure that person away from their vow of celibacy, it's actually causing harm to that person and to all the people around them. So that's why the Buddha teaches you that it would be unwise to have sex with someone who's decided to remain celibate. So here in Thailand, they make this really easy for you, that ordained practitioners wearing orange robes and shaving their hair, you know that they're not choosing to have sex. So you wouldn't be interested to have sex with those types of people. Also here in Thailand, people who wear all white and they also shave their hair, they're not choosing to have sex either. I don't choose to have sex, but I don't wear white and shave my hair because I'm trying to advertise that I don't have sex. That's not what that's for. But you can know that people who wear white every day and who shave their hair, they're not choosing to have sex either. So if you're interested in having sex, you have sex with someone who's choosing to have sex, and then you're still able to practice this teaching and you're not causing harm to these people. There was actually a recent case here in Thailand where there was an individual who was having sex with ordained practitioners, and now those individuals have all kinds of unwholesome kamma to deal with. It was all in the news. You guys might have heard about this, but nonetheless, that's why the Buddha teaches us not to do that, and it's unwise because it's unwholesome kamma, that it's causing harm to these individuals. So where the Buddha is talking about unchastity up here, we can also understand that that's having sex with people who are already committed in other relationships, right? If you're single and they're in other relationships and you try to lure them away, this is going to cause harm, right? You can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can have property damage, you can get sexually transmitted diseases, you can have wealth loss, a loss of your reputation. Same thing if you have sex outside of a relationship that you're committed to, same kind of thing. If you were to have sex with people who are human trafficked, this is someone who's being pressured or forced to be able to have sex for money, typically. In those kinds of environments, not only can you get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get sexually transmitted diseases, but you can also get robbed. People can rob you and steal from you, right? This is all the unwholesome results of our unwise decision to choose to have sex with someone who's human trafficked. Then there's some people who offer paid sexual service that they're not being human trafficked, that they're choosing on their own to offer this service, and they're doing it willingly. And even in that situation, this is still unchastity, having sex with multiple people. So if you were to either be the sex worker or the client, you're still practicing unchastity, and you're going to experience unwholesome results here. Again, someone can get beat up, murdered, robbed. You can lose your wealth. You can get sexually transmitted diseases. All these things can all happen. Notice here that the Buddha doesn't talk about same gender relationships. This is intentional because the Buddha was aware of this during his lifetime. The idea that everybody has sex with the opposite gender, that's something that some people do, but not everybody, right? Because of the universal truth of impermanence, we understand that there's some people that choose to have sex with the same gender, right? That's a normal thing. Ever since the beginning of humanity, this has been happening. The Buddha talks about it in his teachings. He describes it. He's talking to his students, and he's just explaining that this is the case, but he doesn't teach anything about it because he knows there's no harm. Because if there's two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex, if they're the opposite gender or they're the same gender, they're not causing any harm to anybody. It's two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex. So I like to point out that this is how wise this individual was, that 2,500 years ago, he already understood this. There's people today that don't understand this. And those people might get angry if they see a same gender relationship couple, but that couple isn't the one who's causing that anger. That person's causing their own anger because they're having a craving for permanence. They want everybody to have sex with someone of the opposite gender. And this has never occurred ever since the beginning of human history, that it's not possible. Because of the universal truth of impermanence, we know ever since humans came into the world, some people had sex with the same gender, some people had sex with the opposite gender. This is impermanence. We can also understand transgender individuals through the teachings of the Buddha, where we can understand that the body is one thing and the mind is something completely separate. And if we've all been different beings at different times, this mind coming into this body, it's not possible for every single mind to identify with the same sexual organs of the body. So you could have someone who was male in their previous lives, and now that mind is ending up in a female body. Right? And now that individual identifies as a male, even though their sexual organs are a female. And the same thing is true that it could be female. Now the mind can end up in a a male body, right? And now that person identifies as a female, right? This is completely normal. We can understand it through the universal truth of impermanence, that not every mind is going to identify with the same sexual organs, right? That would be permanence if that was the case. But we understand impermanence, as some people's mind and sexual organs are going to match. In other cases, it's not, right? So we can understand this through the universal truth of impermanence, but we can also understand it through the cycle of rebirth, about all these rebirths that have happened in the past. So if you or somebody you know has same gender relationships, or they are transgender, or you're transgender, it's completely normal. If people are angry or upset or frustrated, they're causing it themselves because they're having craving for permanence. They're having that anger because their mind's not getting what it wants, and it's coming from the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. Then sometimes people ask me about masturbation, because some people have been taught, oh, don't masturbate, it's all wrong, it's all horrible, don't do this. So I'm going to teach you about this. I'm not going to teach you how to do it. You probably already know how to do that. I'm going to teach you the natural law of Kamma, okay? So the natural law of Kamma is that if you're increasing your sensual desire through masturbation, this can be harmful to the mind. But you can also use masturbation to decrease your sensual desire as well. It can actually be helpful in certain situations. So let's just say, for example, somebody's listening to me talk right now, and they're realizing, oh my gosh, I have like 10 boyfriends or 10 girlfriends. I should probably just have one. You know, I've been doing this in an unwise way. I should come down to just one partner. Well, now maybe they shrink this down to one partner, but they have all this craving for sex in their mind. And maybe they use some masturbation to help them to come down to this one partner. And this has actually been helpful and beneficial for them. Or let's just say someone has such a strong craving in their mind for sex, they use some masturbation in order to not go out and rape somebody. Say they were thinking about raping somebody, but instead they use masturbation instead, right? This could be very beneficial. This is actually helpful for the mind because they're decreasing the sexual craving. But also somebody could have such high sexual craving that they're masturbating 10, 15, 20, 30 times a day, and now it's increasing their sensual desire. And this is causing harm to their own mind, right? So you need to be able to look at this and see for yourself what would be wise for you. If you understand about how a dam works, those structures that hold back water, these are multi-million-dollar structures, and they hold back water. And when the water builds up on the dam, it's actually threatening the health of the dam. And if this dam busts and bursts, there's millions and millions of dollars that they went into building this dam that they're going to have to spend in order to rebuild it. So what they do in order to protect the dam is they actually open it up and they let some of the water out. And then when the water goes out, it drops down, and then they actually close the dam again. So this is the same kind of thing that you can actually do with something like masturbation. If you're working towards decreasing or eliminating your sexual cravings, you might use masturbation for this purpose. If you're noticing the pressure building up in your mind where you really want to have that pleasure and you haven't been able to do it with a partner, you could actually use a bit of masturbation to drop that down in your mind. And now it protects your mind. And now maybe you go a week or two without having sex. And now let's just say you end up doing some masturbation. Well, now you could go maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks without having sex. And now you might need to do some more masturbation, right? And now maybe you do 3 months or 6 months. You can go longer, right? So this is a way to slowly decrease your sensual desire. So masturbation can actually be helpful. Sex with animals is one of those few things that is black and white, right? That there's no way that an animal could give someone consent to have sex with it. And I imagine if someone did that, there could be injuries, diseases, and things like this, right? Then pornography is something that you might decide to look at too. If you are currently watching pornography, the mind can get really addicted to this, and it's really hard to come out of that. And that typically what the person has is they have a craving for intimacy with another person, and they might choose to move towards something like pornography. And now when you go down into that fantasy world, it's very hard to come out of that. And then even when you do come out of it, this interaction with a human being doesn't quite feel as satisfying any longer because your mind was in this fantasy world. So if I was you, if you were interested in intimacy with a a person, I would suggest going towards having a partner and having a loyal, loving, committed relationship rather than moving towards pornography. And if you're currently using that now, you can actually train your mind to come away from that, and your mind will be better off for it. So do you guys have any questions on this third precept? No questions? Okay. So now this fourth one. This one's really straightforward. It says, abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a true speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. Okay, so the Buddha is teaching you here to be trustworthy in the way that you speak the truth, right? If we actually tell lies, which we've all told lies as a child at some point, we can see that it produced unwholesome results for us. Right? So by you speaking the truth, then people can see you as a true speaker, dependable, reliable, one that they can trust, right? And that's what you would like to build up amongst the people around you, that they can trust you. Whereas if you're lying, you're going to have to keep those lies straight, and people are going to discover your lies, and it's going to damage your personal, professional relationships. Whereas if you just speak the truth, you can be fully protected. That if someone investigates what it is that you shared, you've told the truth, and you don't have any worries. You don't have to worry about anything. Because if you've ever done a lot of lying, you probably remember that your mind was obsessively trying to figure out what you said to one person versus another versus another versus another. And how can you ever get to complete peace and complete joy if your mind's having to constantly figure out what you said from one person to the other? So if you'd like to put your mind at ease, just tell the truth all the time. And if you don't know something, just say, I don't know. That's really helpful for the mind. Sorry. If you say, I don't know, that's really helpful for the ego, right? So you don't have to just tell somebody something. You don't have to just spread rumors and lies around the world. Just speak the truth, and this will actually help you in your relationships. The Buddha understood this so well that I included this other teaching here to help you be able to see this, that he's teaching his son here. Sometimes people think the Buddha left his family and he never came back, but this is actually his son. He was teaching his wife, his son, his mother, other people like this were coming to learn with him. So he didn't leave from these people and never came back. He actually came back, and they actually started learning with him. Here he's teaching his son that even when you tell a joke, that it's unwise to lie. Now, you might not associate a Buddha as someone who tells jokes, but a Buddha tells jokes, right? You guys see him in these pictures where he's looking all solemn and serious, meditating, right? Yeah, he did meditate, but he had a personality. He told jokes. He had fun. And being enlightened isn't walking around being solemn and serious all the time, right? Who wants to get to that, right? You want to have fun and enjoy yourself. That's what enlightenment's about. You actually have way more fun being enlightened than you ever did when you were unenlightened. Being unenlightened, you can only have fun when these certain things are happening. But being enlightened, you can have fun all the time, no matter what's going on. So a Buddha tells jokes. They have a personality. They have fun. But the difference is that an enlightened being, when they tell jokes, they tell the truth, right? Those types of jokes are actually a lot more challenging, right? You got to really think about them before you say them, right? But usually when you've worked at a joke a little bit, it's actually funnier. People find it to be even more funny, right? So you might have to work at this a bit. You might be used to joking in ways that has lies, or you might joke in ways that is degrading and disparaging to other people. That's not the type of joking that you would like to do, or even degrading yourself. Sometimes people joke in that way too. You don't need to joke in that way. You can tell other types of jokes that are fun and interesting, right? It just takes you more time to learn how to do that. But once you do, it'll be really easy for you, and people will find your jokes actually funnier. Okay, so do you guys have any questions on this one? I got all kinds of jokes. A proper one? I don't know. I was telling some jokes the other day at lunch. Oh, you were there. You heard some of my jokes. Yeah. We'll talk after class. Well, maybe you didn't like it. Not everyone's going to like your jokes. That's impermanence, right? All right. No other questions? Okay. All right, so now this last one. Here, the Buddha says, refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. So again, whenever you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, if you don't understand some of the words or language, look it up, investigate it. This word heedlessness, You might not know what it means. I didn't know what it means when I ran across it. I had an idea what I thought it might mean, but I wasn't interested in assuming that I knew what it meant. So I went and looked it up. Okay, here's what it means: careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, or unmindful. If you're putting any substance into the body that is producing unmindfulness, meaning a lack of awareness of mind, this is walking in the opposite direction of enlightenment. So the Buddha is teaching in a way that's timeless here, that can apply this teaching now and during his life and long into the future, that if there's any substance that you could put into the body that is going to produce heedlessness, it would be unwise to do that, because you would like to produce heedfulness. You would like to produce mindfulness, where you have awareness of the mind. And the Buddha couldn't have imagined all the different substances that we would have come up with over the course of our life. So you're going to need to be able to apply this in different situations. And some of these situations with certain substances, they could potentially produce heedlessness, but also in some situations, there could be medical benefits as well. Right? So this marijuana is a good example of this. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of these. This isn't a full exhaustive list. These are just some for you to think about. So marijuana, we know with 100% certainty, it has medical benefits. There's children that have 20 seizures a day, and they've been having that for multiple years. They give them a little bit of CBD oil on the tongue, and they don't have another seizure for 6 months with just one drop of oil on the tongue, right? There's irrefutable evidence that this plant has medical benefits, but it can also be used for heedlessness too. You're the only one that's going to know what you're using it for. So you need to look at this. This marijuana plant, it has two different sides to it. There's a side of it that's called CBD. This is the medical properties. And then there's the THC. The THC is what causes the high, right? So if you're looking for medical benefits, you're usually looking for a high CBD in the plant, right? And you're usually going to ingest it through like an edible or an oil or something like that. Whereas if you're looking for the THC, that's the high, right? That's what you're looking for, is the high. And you might even be smoking it, right? This is damaging the lungs. That's the unwholesome Kamma. But you can also get high from edibles and stuff like that as well. So you're going to need to look at this and see for yourself, why are you taking this? And if you say you're taking it for a medical benefit, be sure you're not doing it for like stress or anxiety, because there's no amount of marijuana that's going to eliminate your stress or anxiety. What's causing that is the craving, desire, attachment. So just taking marijuana isn't going to eliminate your stress and anxiety. So you need to be able to peer into that objectively, right? And really make sure you are taking it for a pure medical reason. We know that cigarettes don't have any medical benefits whatsoever. That's why more and more people are getting off of cigarettes. There was a period of time where a lot of people were smoking, and there was a lot of health issues because of that with the person's physical body, right? Lung cancer, throat cancer, tongue cancer, mouth cancers, all these different things. Not only that, but secondhand smoke too. An individual is causing harm through that as well. So if you're currently smoking, you might decide to move away from that. That's going to help you with your mind, but also the health of the body as well. You're going to need to pay attention to your prescription medications, because there's some medications that can actually be addictive. So before you ever put any substance into this body, you would like to make sure you know what you're putting into the body. So whenever a doctor is prescribing you something, the beauty of these phones nowadays is we live in the information age, that we can sit there right in the doctor's office and we can Google that medication and we can look to see what that medication is. And you can talk to the doctor and you can say, hey, doctor, I noticed that this medication is pretty addictive. Is there another type of medication that you can give for me? Right? And they can potentially prescribe something for you, because some of these medications can actually produce a high. But sometimes what you might get back from the doctor is no. There isn't any other medication that they can prescribe you. That's the only one. And if that's what you find out, that's actually really helpful for you. That's really helpful wisdom, because now you know that this medicine that you're about to take, it can be potentially addictive, and you'd like to get off of that as soon as possible. Take it for a limited period of time and then get off of it as soon as possible so that you don't get addicted to it. So that can be helpful for you. You're going to need to pay attention to your medications. You'd also like to pay attention to your caffeine intake. This is a stimulant. This is a drug. It takes the mind up into this excited state, lifting up the energy, and then you usually drop back down, right? In order to get to enlightenment, or I should say, as you get to enlightenment, you're going to notice that you have energy all day long. Your mind's going to be uplifted. It's going to be bright. It's going to be radiant. It's going to be joyful. It's going to be cheerful. You're going to have gladness in the mind. But you'll never get to that as long as you're relying on something like caffeine, because the mind will get uplifted when you have caffeine, but then it's going to drop off when you don't have caffeine. So you never give the mind the ability to develop that sustainable energy all day long. So if you eliminate your caffeine intake, you'll notice that you'll end up developing the sustainable energy all day long. But as you do that, make sure you realize you're detoxing from a drug, because you'll actually potentially experience withdrawal symptoms. You might have headaches, you might have dry mouth, you might get shakes and things like this. This is the withdrawal symptoms associated with detoxing from this drug. It's just like all these others, right? If you were detoxing from heroin or cocaine or something like that, you're going to go through withdrawal. Same thing with caffeine as well. So let that be the reminder for you that you are detoxing from a drug. You'd like to even pay attention to your sugar intake. We usually learn this as a kid, as we're growing up, and as we get older, we don't usually take in as much of that. But even if we took sugar in excess, this can actually produce a high as well. It can produce heedlessness. So we'd like to pay attention to that. And then there's things like psychedelic substances that sometimes people will tell you that these actually help you to get to enlightenment. This isn't actually true. What psychedelic substances do is they do promote this introspection, this kind of, this reflective nature in the mind, but it's only while you're using this substance. In order to be able to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to be introspective and reflective at all times during your day, so that now whatever situation that you're encountering, you can cultivate wisdom and apply your wisdom in that situation. So if you were talking to your boss or to your mom and you were having a difficult conversation, you can't be like, hey, can you hold on? I need to go drop this hit of acid, or I need to go take these magic mushrooms. Can you just wait for a second, Mom? You're not going to be able to do that. You're going to need to be reflective in the situation, be introspective, apply your wisdom in that situation. So if you rely on something like psychedelic substances, you're never giving your mind the opportunity to develop that introspection and that reflection that your mind is capable of being able to develop. And then you'll have it available to you all day long, where you can be introspective and reflective instead of just when you're using a psychedelic substance. So do you guys have any questions on these? Keeping in mind that I'm not sharing all of the substances here, because there's tons of substances in the world. I just walk through these in a way to be able to help you see how you're going to need to apply this in all these different situations. And it's not black and white, right? There's different substances that are able to do different things. So do you guys have any questions here? No? Okay. I don't see any questions online either. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to break for lunch, give you guys a chance to take a break. It's about 12:40. So if we take almost about an hour and 20-minute lunch break, I apologize, it's not an hour and a half. But when we come back at 2 o'clock, I'm going to teach walking meditation. This is really good for an overactive mind, or if you're having difficulty sitting and being still, or even if you're falling asleep in meditation. I'm going to teach it to you. It takes about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes to teach it to you. And then we're going to do it as a class, and I'll help you guys to get started with your walking meditation. So enjoy your lunch, and perhaps I'll see you guys at 2 o'clock. Okay? Be well. Mm-hmm.